Hello, my friends. Welcome back to English on Point podcast. I'm Leo. Today, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of lessons, lists, or lectures, we're going to spend time together in a story. Not just any story, but one filled with real English, the kind you hear in quiet conversations in city streets, in moments of doubt and courage. The story is called The Café on Maple Street. It's about a young woman named Clara who moves to a new city with nothing but a suitcase, a notebook, and a dream she's almost too afraid to name. Along the way, she meets strangers who become friends, faces choices that test her courage, and discovers that sometimes the smallest moments hold the biggest lessons, not just about life, but about language itself. So, as you listen, you won't be studying English. You'll be living inside it. You'll hear natural phrasal verbs, emotional expressions, subtle tones, and everyday vocabulary, all woven into a story that breathes. And every so often, I'll gently highlight a phrase or idea, not to test you, but to help you notice how English carries feeling, not just facts. So make yourself comfortable, pour a cup of tea or coffee, let your mind settle, and let's step into the world of the Café on Maple Street. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The rain was soft that morning, not the kind that soaks you, but the kind that wraps the city in a quiet hush, like a secret being whispered between buildings. Clara stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth, her wheels clicking against the wet pavement, her breath visible in the cool autumn air. She had arrived in the city just 2 hours ago, on a train that smelled of old books and coffee. And now, with no map and only a crumpled address in her coat pocket, she felt both terrified and, strangely, alive. This was it, the city she'd only seen in movies and daydreams. The place where she'd promised herself she'd finally try, really try, to become the writer she'd always imagined. She checked the address again. 17 Maple Street. A cafe. That's what the note from her aunt had said. Start at the cafe. Ask for Elias. He'll help you find your feet. Clara wasn't sure what that meant, but she walked anyway, her boots splashing through shallow puddles, her eyes scanning the street numbers. The buildings here were old but well kept. Brick facades with ivy climbing the walls, bay windows with lace curtains, and small shops with hand-painted signs. Books and tea. Flowers by Lena. Maple Street Café. Her heart jumped. There it was,
a narrow storefront with a green awning, warm light spilling from the windows, and the rich, comforting smell of roasted coffee beans drifting out onto the sidewalk. Above the door, in elegant gold letters, the daily grind.
She hesitated. What if Elias wasn't there? What if he didn't remember her aunt? What if he took one look at me and said, "You're not ready for this city"? But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking forward even when your knees shake. So, she took a deep breath, pushed open the heavy wooden door, and stepped inside. A bell chimed softly overhead. The cafe was exactly as she'd imagined. Worn wooden floors, mismatched armchairs, shelves lined with secondhand books, and the gentle hum of quiet conversations. At the counter, a man with silver-streaked hair and round glasses was steaming milk, his movements calm and precise. He looked up and smiled. "Morning," he said, his voice warm like honey. "What can I get you?" Clara swallowed. I'm looking for Elias." Elias's eyes softened. "That's me." "Oh," she said, relief flooding her chest. "I'm Clara. My aunt, Marta, sent me." Elias's face lit up. Marta's niece, I've been expecting you." He wiped his hands on his apron and came around the counter. "Welcome to Maple Street." And just like that, Clara felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone who belonged, even if only for a moment. Chapter 2. The First Week in the City. The first week in the city was a blur of small discoveries and quiet adjustments. Elias had offered her a room above the cafe, a tiny studio with a sloped ceiling, a window that looked out over the street, and a desk that had clearly been used by writers before her. "It's not much," he'd said, "but it's yours as long as you need it." In return, Clara helped out at the cafe in the mornings, wiping tables, washing dishes, and slowly learning how to make a decent cappuccino. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave her structure, and more importantly, it gave her a reason to talk to people. At first, her English felt stiff, like a suit that didn't quite fit. She'd pause mid-sentence, searching for the right word, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. But the regulars at the cafe were kind. They didn't rush her. They smiled when she stumbled, and sometimes they'd gently offer the word she was looking for. One morning, an older woman named Ruth said, "You're doing just fine, dear. Language isn't about perfection, it's about connection." Clara held on to those words like a lifeline. In the afternoons, she wrote, not grand novels or brilliant essays, but just observations. The way the light hit the cobblestones after rain, the sound of the busker's guitar on the corner, the quiet sadness in the eyes of the man who came in every day at 3 p.m. and sat alone with a black coffee. She wrote in English, even when it felt clumsy, because Elias had told her, if you want to think in English, you have to live in it. Not just speak it, live it. So she did. She labeled everything in her room with sticky notes: window, lamp, kettle, notebook. She listened to podcasts while making tea. She talked to herself in the mirror. Today, I will be brave. Today, I will try. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the language began to feel less like a foreign object and more like a second skin. Chapter 3. The Stranger. It was on a Tuesday that everything changed. Clara was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and saw a man she'd never seen before, tall, with dark hair and tired eyes, wearing a long coat that looked like it had seen better days. He sat at the small table by the window, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out a sketchbook. For the next hour, he drew. Not the cafe, not the street, just his hands, over and over, as if trying to remember what they looked like. Clara couldn't stop glancing at him. There was something about the way he held his pencil, gentle but with a kind of quiet intensity, that reminded her of herself when she wrote. When he finally stood to leave, he caught her looking. "Sorry," she said quickly, "I didn't mean to stare." He smiled faintly. "It's okay. I'm used to it." There was a pause. Then, almost without thinking, Clara said, "Are you an artist?" He hesitated. "I used to be." Something in his voice made her ask, "What happened?" He looked out the window for a long moment before answering, "Life happened. Loss, doubt, the usual." Clara nodded. She understood. "I'm Clara," she said. "Daniel," he replied. And that was it. But the next day he came back, and the day after that. Soon it became a ritual. Daniel would arrive at 11 a.m., order a coffee, and sketch. Clara would bring his cup, and they'd exchange a few words about the weather, the the news, the book she was reading. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. One rainy afternoon, Daniel didn't sketch. He just sat, staring into his coffee, his shoulders slumped. Clara brought him a fresh cup without being asked. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I got rejected again." "From what?" "An art residency. It was my last chance." Clara sat down across from him. "Why do you say that?" "Because I'm turning 40 next month. Isn't it time to give up?" Clara thought of her own doubts, her own crumpled drafts, her own moments of wanting to quit. "No," she said firmly. "It's never time to give up. Not if it still matters to you." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "Why do you say that?" "Because I'm learning the same thing. Every day I write something terrible, but I keep writing. Because the act of trying is what makes me feel alive." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Can I read something you've written?" Clara's heart raced, but she nodded. That night, she gave him a page from her notebook, a short piece about the café, about Elias, about the feeling of finding a place where you belong. The next day, he handed her a sketch. It was her, standing behind the counter, sunlight catching the steam from the espresso machine, a look of quiet focus on her face. Underneath, he'd written, "The writer who sees everything." Tears filled her eyes. "You see me," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "I do." Chapter 5. The Exhibition. Weeks passed. Daniel started sketching again, not just his hands, but the café, the street, Clara writing at her desk. Clara kept writing, not just observations, but stories, real stories, with characters and heart. One day, Aaliyah said, "You two should do something together, a show, words and drawings." Clara laughed. "We're not ready." "Who decides when you're ready? The world or you?" So they did it. They transformed the back room of the cafe into a small gallery. Daniel hung his sketches, Clara printed her stories and pinned them beside the drawings. On opening night, the cafe was packed. People stood in silence, reading, looking, feeling. Afterward, a woman approached Clara. "Your words, they made me feel less alone." That was all Clara needed. Chapter 6. The Letter. A year later, Clara sat at the same table by the window, her notebook open, her pen moving across the page. She was writing a letter to her aunt. "Dear Marta, I'm still here, still writing, still learning. The cafe is still my home. Daniel is still my friend, and now my collaborator. I don't translate in my head anymore. The words just come. Thank you for sending me here. This city didn't give me my voice. It helped me remember I already had one." She closed the notebook, sipped her coffee, and smiled. Outside, the rain began again. Soft, quiet, full of promise. My friends, this story isn't just about Clara. It's about you. Every time you choose to speak, even when you're unsure,
Every time you write a sentence, even if it's imperfect. Every time you listen, not just to words, but to the feeling behind them. You are building your own cafe on Maple Street. A place where you belong. A place where your voice matters. So, keep going. Keep writing. Keep living your English. I'm Leo. Thank you for listening.